What if I told you that the key to true freedom isn't gaining more control over your life, but learning to let go? Right now, millions of people are walking around carrying invisible chains. They're mentally imprisoned by past relationships that ended years ago, traumatized by failures that happened decades back, and emotionally paralyzed by fears that may never come to pass. They've become collectors of pain, hoarders of resentment, and prisoners of their own minds. But here's what most people don't understand about letting go. It's not about forgiveness. It's not about positive thinking. It's not about pretending everything is fine when it's not. Real letting go is a psychological skill that can be learned, practiced, and mastered. It's the difference between those who move forward with power and those who remain stuck in emotional quicksand for years. The most successful, mentally resilient people on earth have mastered this art. They don't carry yesterday's problems into today's opportunities. They don't let past failures sabotage future possibilities. They understand that holding on to what hurts you doesn't protect you. It poisons you. And today, you're going to learn exactly how they do it. Chapter 1. The Hidden Prison of Attachment. Most people live their entire lives without realizing they're trapped in a mental prison of their own making. Every day, they wake up carrying the same emotional baggage they've been dragging around for months, years, sometimes decades. Old arguments replay in their minds, like broken records. Past betrayals continue to sting with fresh pain. Failed relationships cast shadows over new possibilities. They've become emotional hoarders, collecting pain and storing it in the deepest corners of their consciousness. But here's the brutal truth that no one wants to face. The thing you're holding on to is holding you back. That grudge you've been nursing isn't protecting you from future hurt. It's preventing you from future happiness. That failure you keep replaying in your mind isn't teaching you lessons anymore. It's teaching you to fear trying again. That person who hurt you years ago isn't suffering because you can't forgive them. You are. The science is clear on this. When you hold on to negative emotions, your brain literally rewires itself around that pain. Neuroscientist Dr. Rick Hansen explains that our brains have what he calls a negativity bias. We're neurologically wired to hold on to negative experiences more strongly than positive ones. This served our ancestors well when remembering where the predators lived could save their lives. But in the modern world, this same mechanism keeps us trapped in psychological loops that serve no purpose except to make us miserable. Every time you rehearse an old hurt, you're strengthening the neural pathways associated with that pain. Your brain doesn't distinguish between remembering something that happened and experiencing it fresh. When you replay that argument from 5 years ago, your nervous system responds as if it's happening right now. Your stress hormones spike. Your heart rate increases. Your body floods with the same chemicals it would release if you were actually under attack. This is why some people can't move on. They're not just remembering the past, they're reliving it daily. They've trained their brains to be expert pain processors. Every trigger becomes an opportunity to feel that familiar sting. Every similar situation becomes a chance to prove that the world is exactly as dangerous as they remember it being. They've become addicted to their own suffering without even realizing it. But the most insidious part of this mental prison is that it disguises itself as protection. Your mind convinces you that holding on to anger is keeping you strong, that remembering every detail of how someone wronged you is preventing it from happening again, that staying suspicious and guarded is wisdom. But this isn't protection, It's paralysis. You're not building walls to keep danger out. You're building walls that keep life out. The people who break free from this prison understand something fundamental. You don't have to carry what happened to you. Yes, it happened. Yes, it mattered. Yes, it may have been unfair, devastating, or life-changing. But carrying it forward doesn't change what happened. It only changes what happens next. And what happens next is entirely up to you. Real strength isn't holding on to everything. Real strength is knowing what to release. The most psychologically powerful people aren't those who never get hurt. They're those who know how to let the hurt go. They understand that forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about freeing yourself. They know that letting go isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing not to let the past control your present. Chapter 2. The Psychology of Emotional Attachment. To understand why letting go feels so impossibly difficult, you need to understand how your brain forms emotional attachments in the first place. This isn't just about romantic relationships or family bonds. Your brain forms attachments to everything: ideas, identities, outcomes, expectations, even pain itself. And once these attachments form, your mind will fight to preserve them, even when they're destroying your life. Attachment theory, developed by psychologist John Bowlby, reveals that humans are biologically wired to form emotional bonds as a survival mechanism. In infancy, attachment to caregivers literally kept us alive. Children who could successfully attach to adults who would protect and feed them were more likely to survive. This attachment system is so fundamental that it shapes how you relate to everything in your adult life. But here's where it gets complicated. Your attachment system doesn't just bond you to people. It bonds you to anything that becomes familiar or feels necessary for your sense of safety and identity. This includes your beliefs about yourself, your relationships, your career, even your problems. Yes, you can become attached to your problems. If you've been anxious for years, anxiety becomes part of your identity. If you've been struggling financially, that struggle becomes familiar. If you've been hurt repeatedly, that hurt becomes what you expect. The brain craves predictability above almost everything else. Even negative predictability feels safer than positive uncertainty. This is why people often sabotage good relationships, reject opportunities, or remain in situations that make them miserable. The known pain feels safer than the unknown possibility. Your brain would rather keep you in familiar misery than risk unfamiliar happiness. Dr. Daniel Siegel's research on neuroplasticity shows us that every experience literally changes the structure of your brain. When you repeatedly think the same thoughts, feel the same emotions, or tell yourself the same stories, you're strengthening specific neural networks. Over time, these networks become highways of least resistance. Your brain defaults to these patterns automatically, without your conscious input. This is why changing feels so hard. You're not just trying to think differently. You're trying to rewire neural pathways that have been reinforced thousands of times. You're asking your brain to abandon superhighways and create new dirt roads. Your nervous system interprets this change as a threat and activates your fight or flight response to resist it. But there's another layer to this that most people never understand. Secondary attachment. You don't just get attached to experiences, you get attached to the meaning you've assigned to those experiences. If someone betrayed you, you might form the meaning, "People can't be trusted." If you failed at something important, you might create the meaning, "I'm not good enough." These meanings become part of your identity, and your brain will work tirelessly to prove them true. This is why logical advice often fails. When someone tells you to just let it go or just get over it, they're essentially asking you to abandon a part of your identity that your brain sees as essential for survival. Your attachment system interprets letting go as a threat to who you are. It responds by making you feel anxious, resistant, or even physically ill when you try to release old patterns. Understanding this changes everything. Letting go isn't a moral failing or a lack of willpower. It's a neurobiological challenge that requires specific strategies and techniques. You're not weak for finding it difficult. You're human. Your brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do: protect you by maintaining familiar patterns, even when those patterns no longer serve you. The key insight here is that you can't force letting go through willpower alone. You have to work with your brain's attachment system, not against it. This means gradually reducing the perceived threat of change, creating new positive associations, and slowly shifting your identity in a direction that feels safe to your nervous system. When you understand the psychology behind attachment, letting go becomes less about fighting yourself and more about compassionately retraining your own mind. Chapter 3. The hidden cost of emotional baggage. Most people dramatically underestimate the true cost of carrying emotional baggage. They think holding on to past hurts is just about feeling bad sometimes. But the reality is far more devastating. Emotional baggage doesn't just affect your mood, it affects your health, your relationships, your career, your decision-making ability, and your capacity to experience joy. It's like carrying a 100-pound weight everywhere you go while pretending it's not affecting your ability to run. Let's start with what emotional baggage does to your body. Chronic resentment, unprocessed trauma, and persistent negative emotions create a state of prolonged stress that wreaks havoc on your physical health. Dr. Gabor Mate's groundbreaking research shows that emotional stress is directly linked to autoimmune diseases, cancer, heart disease, and chronic pain conditions. When you hold on to anger, your body produces stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline that are meant for short-term threats, not long-term storage. Imagine your body's stress response system like a fire alarm. It's designed to go off when there's immediate danger. Mobilize your resources to deal with the threat. Then return to normal once the danger passes. But when you carry emotional baggage, it's like having a fire alarm that never shuts off. Your nervous system remains in a constant state of alert, believing that the danger from years ago is still present today. This chronic stress state doesn't just make you feel tired, it literally ages you faster. Research from the University of California shows that people who carry high levels of psychological stress have shorter telomeres, the protective caps on chromosomes that determine cellular aging. Emotional baggage is literally shortening your lifespan at a genetic level. Every day you spend holding on to past hurts is a day you're borrowing from your future health. But the physical costs are only the beginning. Emotional baggage destroys your ability to form healthy relationships. When you're carrying unresolved hurt from past relationships, you unconsciously project that pain onto new people. You become suspicious of kindness. You interpret neutral actions as threats, and you build walls that keep genuine connection out. You're not protecting yourself from getting hurt again. You're guaranteeing that you'll be lonely. People who carry emotional baggage often develop what psychologists call hypervigilance. They become experts at scanning for signs of potential threat or betrayal. This might sound like wisdom, but it's actually a form of mental torture. You end up living in a constant state of anticipation for the next hurt, the next disappointment, the next betrayal. You can't relax into relationships because you're always waiting for them to go wrong. This hypervigilance extends beyond relationships into every area of life. When you're carrying baggage from past failures, you become risk-averse in ways that limit your potential. You might avoid applying for promotions because past rejections convinced you that you're not leadership material. You might not start that business because a previous failure taught you that you're not entrepreneurial. You might not pursue creative projects because past criticism convinced you that you have no talent. Emotional baggage also hijacks your decision-making ability. Instead of making choices based on current reality and future possibilities, you make choices based on past pain. You choose the safe option not because it's best, but because it won't trigger memories of when you chose the risky option and got hurt. You avoid certain types of people not because they're wrong for you, but because they remind you of someone who hurt you. You turn down opportunities not because they're not good enough, but because similar opportunities led to disappointment before. Perhaps most tragically, emotional baggage steals your ability to experience joy. When your nervous system is chronically activated by past trauma, it becomes nearly impossible to fully relax into positive experiences. Even when good things happen, part of your mind is waiting for the other shoe to drop, anticipating how this good thing will eventually turn bad, or feeling guilty for being happy when you should be protecting yourself. This is why some people can achieve everything they thought they wanted and still feel empty. They got the relationship, the career, the financial success, but they can't enjoy it because they're still carrying the pain from when they didn't have these things. The baggage from their struggling years prevents them from fully embracing their successful ones. The most insidious cost of emotional baggage is how it limits your identity. When you define yourself by what happened to you, you become stuck in an old version of yourself. You remain the person who was betrayed, the person who failed, the person who wasn't chosen, the person who was hurt. This identity becomes a prison that prevents you from growing, evolving, and becoming who you're capable of being. But here's what you need to understand. None of these costs are necessary. Every single one of them can be eliminated by learning to let go. The weight you've been carrying isn't permanent. The hypervigilance isn't protecting you. The fear isn't keeping you safe. It's all just programming that can be changed. When you truly let go, you don't just feel better. You become free to experience life with the full capacity that was always yours. Chapter 4. The Neuroscience of Release. Understanding how your brain processes and stores emotional information is crucial for learning to let go effectively. Most people try to release old pain through willpower or positive thinking. But these approaches often fail because they don't address the neurobiological reality of how memories and emotions are encoded in your brain. Real letting go requires working with your nervous system, not against it. When something traumatic or emotionally significant happens to you, your brain doesn't just store it as a regular memory. It gets encoded in multiple areas simultaneously. The hippocampus stores the narrative details. The amygdala stores the emotional intensity, and the body stores the physical sensations. This is why traumatic memories feel so vivid, and why they can be triggered by seemingly unrelated events. A smell, a tone of voice, or even a particular feeling can activate the entire memory network instantly. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk's groundbreaking research in The Body Keeps the Score reveals that traumatic memories are stored differently than normal memories. Regular memories integrate over time, becoming less vivid and emotionally charged. But traumatic memories remain frozen in their original form, complete with all the emotional and physical sensations from when they first occurred. This is why someone can talk about a painful event from 20 years ago and still become flooded with the same emotions they felt originally. The key insight here is that traumatic memories aren't fully processed. They exist in your nervous system like undigested emotional food. Your brain keeps trying to make sense of them, replay them, and resolve them. But without the right tools, they remain stuck in an active state. This is why certain memories seem to have such power over you, why they can affect your mood instantly, and why they influence your behavior even when you consciously know better. But neuroscience has also revealed something hopeful. Your brain is neuroplastic, meaning it can literally rewire itself throughout your entire life. Every time you access a memory, it becomes temporarily unstable and can be modified before it's stored again. This process, called memory reconsolidation, opens a window of opportunity for healing that most people never learn to utilize. When you recall a painful memory while in a calm, safe state, you can actually change how it's stored in your brain. The key is creating what neuroscientists call a mismatch experience. Instead of recalling the memory in the same emotional state you were in originally, you recall it while feeling secure, supported, and resourceful. This gradually reduces the emotional charge of the memory and integrates it as a normal part of your life story, rather than a frozen trauma. This is why traditional talk therapy sometimes fails. Simply talking about traumatic events can actually reinforce them if you're in a distressed state while discussing them. You end up encoding the memory with fresh, emotional intensity rather than resolving it. Effective trauma therapy requires accessing the memory while maintaining nervous system regulation, which is a skill that must be developed gradually. The vagus nerve, the longest cranial nerve in your body, plays a crucial role in your ability to let go. This nerve is responsible for your rest and digest response, the opposite of fight or flight. When your vagus nerve is functioning well, you have what Dr. Stephen Porges calls neuroception of safety. You can accurately assess whether situations are actually dangerous or just triggering old memories. You can remain calm and grounded even when discussing difficult topics. But when your vagus nerve function is impaired by chronic stress or trauma, you lose this ability to accurately assess safety. Everything feels threatening, even when it's not. This is why people with significant emotional baggage often overreact to minor stressors or feel anxious in situations that should feel safe. Their nervous systems are stuck in a defensive mode that made sense during the original trauma but doesn't serve them in current reality. Developing vagal tone through specific breathing techniques, cold exposure, meditation, and other practices is essential for letting go. You can't release what you can't safely feel. If approaching old pain triggers your fight or flight response, your brain will work to avoid that pain rather than process it. But when you have good vagal tone, you can approach difficult emotions with curiosity and compassion rather than fear and resistance. Mirror neurons, another crucial discovery in neuroscience. Explain why letting go is easier in the presence of others who have already learned to regulate their own nervous systems. These specialized brain cells fire both when you perform an action and when you observe someone else performing the same action. When you're around someone who is genuinely calm and grounded, your mirror neurons help your own nervous system learn that state. This is why effective therapists, coaches, and healers don't just give advice. They provide nervous system regulation through their own presence. Their calm becomes contagious, creating a safe space where your brain can begin to reorganize traumatic material. This is also why certain people feel immediately calming to be around, while others feel triggering, regardless of what they're actually saying. Understanding these neurobiological realities changes how you approach letting go. Instead of trying to think your way out of emotional patterns, you focus on creating the neurological conditions that allow natural healing to occur. You learn to regulate your nervous system first, then gently approach old pain from a place of safety and strength. You understand that healing happens in layers, not all at once, and you develop patience with the process rather than trying to force rapid change. Chapter 5. The Architecture of Emotional Freedom. True letting go isn't a single event. It's a systematic process that requires understanding the different layers of attachment and addressing each one specifically. Most people fail at letting go because they approach it haphazardly, hoping that wanting to move on will be enough. But emotional freedom has an architecture, a specific structure that must be built carefully and intentionally. The foundation of emotional freedom is what I call radical self-honesty. Before you can let go of anything, you must first acknowledge exactly what you're holding on to and why. This sounds simple, but most people live in elaborate denial about their emotional attachments. They'll say they're over something while their behavior clearly demonstrates they're not. They'll claim they've forgiven someone while still avoiding places where they might run into that person. They'll insist they're ready to move forward while sabotaging every opportunity to actually do so. Radical self-honesty requires looking at your emotional attachments without judgment, but with complete accuracy. This means acknowledging the secondary benefits you're getting from holding on to pain. Yes, there are benefits. Or you would have let go already. Maybe holding on to anger makes you feel powerful in a situation where you felt powerless. Maybe staying hurt gets you sympathy and attention from others. Maybe remaining stuck allows you to avoid taking risks that could lead to new disappointments. These secondary benefits aren't character flaws. They're survival strategies that made sense at one time. Your psyche developed them for good reasons, and honoring that while still choosing to evolve beyond them is crucial for lasting change. When you can honestly acknowledge what you're getting from staying stuck, you can consciously choose to get those needs met in healthier ways. The second layer of emotional freedom is developing what I call witness consciousness. This is your ability to observe your thoughts and emotions without being consumed by them. Most people are completely identified with their mental and emotional content. When they feel angry, they become anger. When they think a negative thought, they become that thought. But witness consciousness allows you to step back and observe these internal experiences with detachment and curiosity. Developing witness consciousness is like learning to watch your emotions like weather patterns. Instead of being caught in the storm, you can observe the storm from a place of safety. You can notice anger arising without becoming angry. You can watch fear move through you without becoming fearful. This doesn't mean becoming emotionally numb. It means developing the capacity to feel without being overwhelmed. Meditation, mindfulness practices, and somatic awareness techniques all help develop witness consciousness. But the key is consistency rather than intensity. 5 minutes of daily practice is more valuable than hour-long sessions once a week. You're literally training your brain to recognize that you are not your thoughts, you are not your emotions, and you are not your past experiences. You are the awareness that can observe all of these things. The third layer involves understanding the difference between emotional processing and emotional rumination. Processing is healthy, rumination is toxic. When you process an emotion, you feel it fully. You learn from it. You extract whatever wisdom or information it contains, and then you let it go. When you ruminate, you think about the emotion, analyze it, replay it, and rehearse it without actually feeling and releasing it. True emotional processing often involves temporarily feeling worse before feeling better. You have to be willing to fully experience the pain you've been avoiding in order to move through it. This is why many people stay stuck in rumination. It feels like they're dealing with their emotions without actually having to feel them fully. But rumination is just mental masturbation. It creates the illusion of progress without any actual movement. Learning to process emotions requires what Dr. Peter Levine calls titration, experiencing difficult emotions in small, manageable doses, rather than being overwhelmed by them all at once. You learn to feel just enough intensity to make progress without triggering your nervous system's defensive responses. This requires developing emotional regulation skills and learning to modulate your own intensity consciously. The fourth layer of emotional freedom is rewriting your identity story. Most people's sense of self is built around their history, particularly their painful history. They see themselves as the person who was abandoned, betrayed, rejected, or traumatized. This identity becomes a limiting factor that prevents them from experiencing new possibilities. You can't create a new life while carrying an old identity. Rewriting your identity story doesn't mean denying what happened or pretending it didn't matter. It means choosing which aspects of your experience define you moving forward. Instead of being someone who was hurt, you can choose to be someone who learned resilience. Instead of being someone who failed, you can choose to be someone who takes risks. Instead of being someone who was rejected, you can choose to be someone who knows their worth, isn't determined by others' opinions. This identity shift requires what psychologists call post-traumatic growth, finding ways that your difficult experiences have actually made you stronger, wiser, or more compassionate. This isn't about being grateful for trauma or pretending it was a gift. It's about refusing to let painful experiences limit your future possibilities. Every challenge you've survived has given you capabilities that people who haven't faced those challenges don't have. The final layer of emotional freedom is developing what I call conscious creation. Your ability to actively create new experiences that reinforce your new identity and emotional patterns. You can't just let go of old patterns. You have to replace them with new ones. This means deliberately exposing yourself to experiences that challenge old beliefs. Building relationships with people who see you as who you're becoming rather than who you were, and taking actions that align with your new identity rather than your old one. Conscious creation requires stepping out of your comfort zone regularly and intentionally. Every time you act from your new identity rather than your old one, you're strengthening new neural pathways and weakening old ones. Every time you respond differently to a trigger than you would have in the past, you're proving to your nervous system that change is possible and safe. This architectural approach to emotional freedom ensures that your letting go process is thorough and sustainable. You're not just temporarily feeling better. You're actually rebuilding the foundation of how you relate to yourself and your experiences. When you complete this process, letting go becomes natural rather than forced, permanent rather than temporary, and empowering rather than depleting. Chapter 6. The Fatal Myths That Keep You Stuck. The reason most people fail at letting go isn't because they're not trying hard enough. It's because they're operating from fundamentally flawed beliefs about how emotional healing actually works. These myths are so deeply embedded in our culture that they feel like truth, but they're actually the biggest obstacles to your freedom. Understanding and dismantling these myths is essential before you can begin the real work of letting go. Myth number 1. Time heals all wounds. This is perhaps the most damaging lie ever told about emotional healing. Time doesn't heal anything by itself. Time is neutral. What heals wounds is what you do with time. If you spend years ruminating, avoiding, and reinforcing old patterns, time will actually make your emotional wounds worse, not better. They'll calcify into rigid beliefs about yourself and the world that become harder to change with each passing year. Think about people you know who are still bitter about things that happened decades ago. Time didn't heal them. It preserved their pain in amber. The only way time contributes to healing is if you're actively using that time to process, learn, and grow. Otherwise, time just gives your nervous system more opportunities to rehearse old trauma patterns and make them more automatic. Real healing happens when you consciously engage with your pain, not when you passively wait for it to disappear. This means feeling it fully, understanding its message, extracting its lessons, and actively choosing to respond differently. Time can provide the space for this work, but the work itself must be intentional and deliberate. Myth number 2. You need to forgive to move on. Forgiveness has become the universal prescription for emotional healing, but it's often prescribed prematurely and misunderstood completely. True forgiveness is the natural result of genuine healing, not a prerequisite for it. When you try to force forgiveness before you've processed your pain, you're essentially bypassing your own emotional experience and creating spiritual materialism around your trauma. Premature forgiveness is actually a form of emotional avoidance. It's a way of trying to skip over the messy, uncomfortable work of actually feeling and processing your hurt. You tell yourself you should forgive because it's the right thing to do. But underneath, you're still carrying all the same resentment and pain. This creates internal fragmentation where part of you is trying to be spiritual and evolved while another part is still angry and hurt. Real forgiveness happens naturally when you've fully processed your experience, when you've grieved what was lost, learned what needed to be learned, and reclaimed your power from the situation. Forgiveness becomes effortless because you no longer need to protect yourself from what happened. You're not trying to forgive from a place of weakness, hoping it will make the pain go away. You're forgiving from a place of strength, because you're no longer defined by what someone else did or didn't do. Myth number 3. Just think positive and focus on the future. This toxic positivity approach to emotional healing is not just ineffective, it's harmful. When you try to cover unprocessed emotions with positive thinking, you're creating a psychological split between your conscious intentions and your unconscious reality. Your mind might be focused on the future, but your nervous system is still stuck in the past. Unprocessed emotions don't disappear when you ignore them. They go underground and run your life from the shadows. They influence your relationships, your decision-making, your health, and your capacity for joy in ways you're not even aware of. Trying to think positively while carrying emotional baggage is like trying to run a marathon with a backpack full of rocks while pretending the backpack isn't there. True healing requires going through your emotions, not around them. You have to be willing to feel the depth of your pain before you can access the depth of your joy. This doesn't mean wallowing or becoming identified with negative emotions, but it does mean being honest about what you're actually feeling rather than what you think you should be feeling. Myth number 4. Strong people don't need help to get over things. This individualistic myth keeps countless people trapped in suffering because they believe that needing support is a sign of weakness. But the human nervous system is designed for co-regulation. We literally need other regulated nervous systems to help us regulate our own, especially when we're dealing with overwhelming emotions or traumatic material. Trying to heal significant emotional wounds completely alone is like trying to perform surgery on yourself. It's possible in extreme circumstances, but it's unnecessarily difficult and often ineffective. The shame around needing help often becomes another layer of suffering that prevents people from accessing the support that could accelerate their healing exponentially. The strongest people aren't those who never need help, they're those who are wise enough to seek appropriate support when they need it. They understand that healing happens in relationship, not in isolation. They know that there's no prize for suffering alone and no shame in letting others help carry the load while they rebuild their strength. Myth number 5. If you truly let go, you'll forget about it. Many people resist letting go because they believe it means forgetting important experiences or dishonoring what they've been through. But letting go has nothing to do with forgetting. Your memories remain. Your lessons remain. Your growth remains. What changes is your relationship to these experiences. When you truly let go, painful memories lose their emotional charge, but retain their informational value. You can remember what happened without being re-traumatized by the memory. You can acknowledge the impact something had on you without continuing to be defined by it. You can honor what you've been through without being imprisoned by it. This distinction is crucial because the fear of forgetting often keeps people attached to pain. They worry that if they stop hurting about something, it means it didn't matter, or that they're betraying their own experience. But the opposite is true. When you let go skillfully, you're actually honoring your experience by refusing to let it limit your future possibilities. Myth number 6. Letting go means you're weak or giving up. This myth confuses letting go with giving up, but they're completely different. Giving up is surrendering your power to external circumstances. Letting go is reclaiming your power from past circumstances. Giving up is passive and defeated. Letting go is active and empowered. When you let go, you're not saying that what happened was okay or that you don't care about injustice. You're saying that you refuse to let someone else's actions continue to control your life. You're choosing to put your energy into creating the future you want rather than trying to change a past that's already fixed. This is actually the ultimate act of strength. It takes tremendous courage to feel your pain fully and then choose to move beyond it. It takes incredible power to stop being a victim of your circumstances and start being the author of your life. Letting go isn't weakness. It's liberation. Chapter 7. The Truth About Forgiveness versus Letting Go. One of the most misunderstood aspects of emotional healing is the relationship between forgiveness and letting go. Most people use these terms interchangeably, but they're actually completely different processes that serve different functions in your psychological development. Understanding this distinction is crucial because trying to force forgiveness when what you actually need is to learn to let go will keep you stuck in spiritual bypassing and emotional confusion. Letting go is about you and your relationship to your own experience. It's an internal process of releasing attachment to outcomes, expectations, and old stories that no longer serve you. You can let go of someone's impact on your life without ever forgiving them for what they did. You can release the emotional charge around an experience while still maintaining appropriate boundaries and consequences. Forgiveness, on the other hand, is about them and your relationship to their actions. It's a conscious choice to release someone from the debt you believe they owe you for the harm they caused. Forgiveness is often relational and can involve reconciliation, though it doesn't have to. But it's important to understand that forgiveness is not required for your own healing and freedom. This distinction matters because many people torture themselves trying to forgive people who have caused severe harm when what they actually need is to let go of the impact that harm had on their lives. You don't have to forgive your abusive parent to heal from the trauma of growing up in an unstable home. You don't have to forgive someone who betrayed you to stop letting that betrayal influence your future relationships. You don't have to forgive anyone to reclaim your power and create a beautiful life. In fact, premature or forced forgiveness often prevents genuine healing. When you try to forgive someone before you've fully processed your own experience, you're essentially abandoning yourself emotionally. You're prioritizing their comfort or your spiritual image over your own legitimate need to feel and integrate what happened to you. This creates internal fragmentation and often leads to repeated patterns of being victimized. Real forgiveness, when it happens naturally, comes from a place of fullness, not emptiness. You're not forgiving because you need to get over something or because you think you should. You're forgiving because you've processed your experience so thoroughly that you no longer need to protect yourself from what happened. The person's actions no longer have any power over your sense of self or your capacity for joy. This kind of forgiveness often doesn't even feel like forgiveness. It feels like indifference. You're not trying to forgive. You simply don't care anymore. The person who hurt you becomes psychologically irrelevant to your current experience. Their actions become something that happened in your past rather than something that's happening to you in your present. But here's what's important to understand. This natural forgiveness may never come, and that's perfectly okay. Some actions are unforgivable, and some people don't deserve your forgiveness. Your healing doesn't depend on your capacity for forgiveness. It depends on your capacity to let go of how their actions affected you. This is especially important for people who have experienced severe trauma, abuse, or betrayal. The pressure to forgive can become another form of victimization. where you're made to feel responsible for healing the relationship with someone who harmed you. But you're not responsible for forgiving anyone. You're only responsible for your own healing and freedom. Letting go, however, is always possible and always beneficial. You can let go of the anger that's eating away at your peace. You can let go of the story that you're damaged goods because of what someone did to you. You can let go of the hypervigilance that developed as a protection mechanism but now limits your capacity for connection. You can let go of the identity of being a victim without having to forgive the person who victimized you. The process of letting go is deeply personal and doesn't require anyone else's participation. You don't need the person who hurt you to acknowledge what they did, apologize, or make amends. You don't need them to understand the impact of their actions or show remorse. Your freedom is not dependent on their conscience or their capacity for growth. This is incredibly liberating because it means your healing is entirely within your control. You don't have to wait for an apology that may never come. You don't have to hope that someone will change or become the person you needed them to be. You can begin the process of reclaiming your life immediately, regardless of what anyone else does or doesn't do. The practical difference between working on forgiveness versus working on letting go affects your entire approach to healing. When you focus on forgiveness, you're often still oriented toward the other person and their actions. When you focus on letting go, you're oriented toward yourself and your own freedom. This shift in focus accelerates healing dramatically because you're no longer waiting for external conditions to change before you can feel better. Learning to let go also teaches you that you have control over your internal experience, regardless of external circumstances. This is one of the most empowering realizations you can have as a human being. No one can make you carry their actions forward in your life. No one can force you to define yourself by what they did or didn't do. No one can control your inner landscape without your consent. When you master the art of letting go, you become psychologically invulnerable in the healthiest possible way. People can still hurt you, disappoint you, or betray you, but they can't derail you. You feel the impact of negative experiences without becoming defined by them. You process pain without becoming identified with it. You learn from difficult experiences without carrying them as baggage into your future. Chapter 8. The Letting Go Toolkit. Practical Techniques for Emotional Release. Now that you understand the psychology and neuroscience behind emotional attachment, it's time to learn specific techniques for actually releasing what you've been carrying. These aren't theoretical concepts or spiritual platitudes. These are evidence-based, neurologically informed practices that create measurable changes in your nervous system and your relationship to difficult experiences. The first technique is called somatic experiencing, developed by Dr. Peter Levine. This approach recognizes that trauma and emotional charge are stored in the body, not just in the mind. When something overwhelming happens, your nervous system doesn't get to complete its natural response cycle. The energy that was mobilized to deal with the threat remains stuck in your system, creating chronic activation and emotional reactivity. Somatic experiencing works by helping you complete these interrupted responses in a safe, controlled way. You learn to track sensations in your body as you gently approach difficult memories or emotions. Instead of being overwhelmed by the full intensity of stored trauma, you learn to discharge it gradually by following your body's natural healing rhythms. The key principle is titration, experiencing just enough activation to make progress without overwhelming your nervous system's capacity to integrate the experience. You might start by simply noticing what you feel in your body when you think about a difficult situation. Do you feel tightness in your chest? Tension in your shoulders? A sinking feeling in your stomach? Instead of trying to think your way through these sensations, you simply observe them with curiosity and allow them to move and change naturally. Often, just this simple act of witnessing creates spontaneous release. Your body begins to shake, tremble, or move in ways that discharge the stored energy. You might feel heat, tingling, or waves of sensation as your nervous system completes responses that were interrupted years ago. This isn't emotional catharsis or dramatic emotional expression. It's the quiet, organic process of your body healing itself when given the space and attention to do so. The second technique is cognitive restructuring, but not the positive thinking version that most people are familiar with. Real cognitive restructuring involves identifying and challenging the unconscious beliefs that keep you attached to old pain. These beliefs often form during traumatic or disappointing experiences and then operate below the level of consciousness, influencing your behavior and emotional reactions without your awareness. For example, if you were betrayed by someone you trusted, you might have formed the unconscious belief that people always let you down, or trust leads to pain. This belief then filters your perception of new relationships, causing you to look for evidence that supports it while ignoring evidence that contradicts it. You end up creating a self-fulfilling prophecy where your defensive behavior actually creates the rejection you're trying to avoid. Cognitive restructuring involves bringing these unconscious beliefs into conscious awareness and then systematically examining their validity. You ask questions like, is this belief actually true in all cases? What evidence do I have that contradicts this belief? How is this belief serving me, and how is it limiting me? What would be a more balanced and accurate belief? The goal isn't to replace negative beliefs with unrealistically positive ones. It's to develop more nuanced, flexible beliefs that allow for both the reality of human imperfection and the possibility of genuine connection and success. Instead of, people always let you down, you might develop the belief that some people are trustworthy and some aren't, and I can learn to discern the difference. The third technique is emotional regulation through breathwork. Your breath is the fastest and most accessible tool for changing your nervous system state. When you're carrying emotional baggage, your breathing patterns often become shallow, restricted, and irregular. This perpetuates the stress response and keeps you stuck in reactive patterns. Conscious breathing practices can literally rewire your nervous system in real time. When you breathe slowly and deeply, you activate your parasympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for rest, repair, and integration. This creates the neurological conditions necessary for emotional processing and release. One of the most effective breathing patterns for emotional release is called coherent breathing. You breathe in for a count of 5 and out for a count of 5, maintaining this rhythm for 10 to 20 minutes. This creates what researchers call heart rate variability coherence, a state where your heart, brain, and nervous system are operating in optimal synchronization. While maintaining this breathing rhythm, you can gently bring difficult emotions or memories into your awareness. Instead of being overwhelmed by their intensity, the regulated breathing keeps your nervous system stable enough to process them safely. You're not trying to force anything to change. You're simply creating the conditions where natural healing can occur. The fourth technique involves working with parts of your personality through internal family systems therapy, developed by Dr. Richard Schwartz. This approach recognizes that everyone has different aspects or parts of their personality that develop to help them survive and thrive in different circumstances. When you've been hurt or traumatized, protective parts develop to keep you safe from similar experiences in the future. The problem is that these protective parts often overgeneralize and continue trying to protect you even when you're no longer in danger. The part that learned not to trust anyone continues operating even in relationships with trustworthy people. The part that learned to be hypervigilant continues scanning for threats even in safe environments. The part that learned to be self-sufficient continues rejecting help even when support would be beneficial. Working with parts involves developing a relationship with these different aspects of yourself with curiosity and compassion rather than judgment or rejection. You learn to appreciate what each part was trying to do for you, while also helping it update its understanding of your current reality. You might have a conversation with the part that doesn't trust anyone, thanking it for trying to protect you, while explaining that you're now capable of making more nuanced decisions about who to trust. This internal dialogue isn't just imagination or self-talk. Neuroscience has shown that different parts of your personality are associated with different neural networks in your brain. When you consciously communicate with these different parts, you're actually facilitating integration between different brain regions, which is the neurological basis of psychological healing. The fifth technique is conscious memory reconsolidation. Every time you recall a memory, it becomes temporarily unstable and can be modified before it's stored again. This creates an opportunity to change how traumatic memories are encoded in your brain, reducing their emotional charge and integrating them more effectively into your life story. The process involves recalling difficult memories while maintaining a resourced, regulated state. You might surround yourself with people who make you feel safe, engage in activities that make you feel strong, or use breathing techniques to stay grounded. From this regulated state, you gently bring the difficult memory into your awareness. But instead of being consumed by the original emotions, you experience it from your current perspective. You might imagine your current self visiting your past self during the traumatic event, offering comfort, protection, or wisdom. You might visualize the memory occurring in a different setting where you felt safe and supported. You might imagine having resources, allies, or capabilities that you didn't have at the time. The goal is to create new associations with the memory that contradict the original feelings of powerlessness, isolation, or terror. This isn't about changing what happened or minimizing its impact. It's about updating your nervous system's understanding of what the experience means about you, other people, and the world. Instead of the memory confirming that you're powerless, it becomes evidence of your resilience. Instead of proving that the world is dangerous, it becomes information about specific dangers while preserving your capacity to recognize safety. Chapter 9. Releasing specific types of emotional baggage. Different types of emotional baggage require different approaches for effective release. The strategies that work for healing from betrayal won't necessarily work for releasing perfectionism, and the methods for processing grief differ from those needed for overcoming shame. Understanding these distinctions allows you to apply the right tools at the right time, rather than using a one-size-fits-all approach that often fails. Relationship betrayal creates a specific type of emotional baggage that centers around broken trust and shattered expectations. When someone you love betrays you, it doesn't just hurt in the moment. It fundamentally challenges your ability to believe in the goodness of other people and the safety of intimate connection. The pain isn't just about what happened. It's about what it seems to mean about your judgment, your worth, and the possibility of future happiness. The key to releasing betrayal baggage is separating the specific person and situation from your general capacity for trust. Betrayal teaches you that this person, in this situation, with these circumstances, was not trustworthy. It doesn't mean that no one is trustworthy, that you're incapable of good judgment, or that love always leads to pain. But your nervous system often generalizes from one data point, creating protective strategies that limit all future relationships. Healing from betrayal requires developing what researchers call differentiated trust. Instead of seeing trust as all or nothing, you learn to assess trustworthiness contextually. You can trust someone with emotional support but not financial decisions. You can trust someone in casual friendship but not intimate partnership. You can trust someone's intentions while recognizing their limitations or blind spots. This nuanced approach to trust allows you to remain open to connection while being appropriately cautious. You're not trying to trust everyone equally, which would be naive and dangerous. You're learning to calibrate your trust based on evidence, consistency, and track record, rather than either blind faith or universal suspicion. Failure and rejection create emotional baggage around self-worth and capability. When you fail at something important or get rejected by someone you care about, your mind often creates meaning that extends far beyond the specific situation. A business failure becomes evidence that you're not entrepreneurial. A romantic rejection becomes proof that you're not lovable. An academic struggle becomes confirmation that you're not intelligent. This type of baggage is particularly insidious because it creates self-fulfilling prophecies. When you believe you're destined to fail, you either avoid taking risks that could lead to success, or you sabotage your efforts unconsciously. When you believe you're not worthy of love, you either avoid relationships, or you behave in ways that push people away. Releasing failure and rejection baggage requires developing what psychologist Carol Dweck calls a growth mindset. Instead of seeing failure as evidence of fixed limitations, you learn to see it as feedback and opportunity for improvement. Instead of interpreting rejection as judgment of your fundamental worth, you recognize it as indication of compatibility, timing, or other factors that have nothing to do with your value as a person. This shift requires changing your relationship to discomfort and uncertainty. Most people try to avoid situations where failure or rejection are possible. But growth requires regularly exposing yourself to these possibilities. You build confidence not by avoiding challenges, but by proving to yourself that you can handle whatever outcomes arise. Childhood trauma creates perhaps the most complex form of emotional baggage because it occurs during crucial developmental periods when your nervous system and sense of self are still forming. Childhood trauma doesn't just create painful memories, it creates fundamental beliefs about safety, love, and your place in the world that feel like absolute truth because they were formed before you had the cognitive capacity to question them. Adults who experience childhood trauma often struggle with emotional regulation, relationship patterns, and self-worth in ways that seem disproportionate to current circumstances. They might have extreme reactions to minor conflicts, difficulty trusting even obviously trustworthy people, or persistent feelings of shame and inadequacy. Despite objective evidence of their competence and lovability. Healing childhood trauma requires what therapists call reparenting yourself. This involves consciously providing yourself with the safety, validation, and unconditional love that you needed but didn't receive as a child. You learn to become the protective, nurturing parent to your own inner child, setting appropriate boundaries, meeting your own needs, and speaking to yourself with kindness rather than criticism. This process often requires grieving what you didn't receive during crucial developmental periods. You have to acknowledge the reality of what was missing before you can begin providing it for yourself. This grieving process can be intense and may require professional support, but it's essential for breaking the cycles of trauma that often perpetuate across generations. Loss and grief create emotional baggage. When natural mourning processes get interrupted or complicated by guilt, regret, or unfinished business. Healthy grief involves feeling the full impact of loss while gradually adapting to life without what was lost. But complicated grief gets stuck in particular stages, often because there are secondary emotions like anger or relief that feel unacceptable alongside sadness. The key to releasing grief baggage is learning to feel all the emotions associated with your loss, not just the ones that seem appropriate or socially acceptable. You might feel angry at someone who died for leaving you. You might feel relieved that a difficult relationship is over. You might feel guilty for moving forward when someone you loved can't. All of these emotions are normal and necessary parts of the grieving process. Healthy grief also requires finding ways to maintain connection to what was lost, while building new meaning and purpose in your current life. This might involve creating rituals that honor someone's memory, carrying forward their values in your own choices, or finding ways to help others who are facing similar losses. The goal isn't to get over significant losses, but to integrate them into your continuing life story in ways that honor both what was lost and what remains possible. Shame creates perhaps the most paralyzing form of emotional baggage because it attacks your core sense of worth and belonging. While guilt says, "I did something bad," shame says, "I am something bad." This distinction is crucial because shame-based identity creates pervasive feelings of inadequacy that affect every area of all ever, quote, of guilt life. Shame often develops when you're criticized, rejected, or punished for fundamental aspects of your personality or identity rather than specific behaviors. Children who are consistently told they're too much or not enough develop shame about their basic needs and impulses. Adults who experience discrimination or marginalization may internalize shame about characteristics they can't change. Healing shame requires what researcher Brené Brown calls shame resilience. Your ability to recognize shame when it arises and respond to it with self-compassion rather than self-attack. This involves developing the capacity to share your shame experiences with trusted others who can provide empathy and perspective without trying to fix or minimize your experience. Shame loses its power when it's met with empathy rather than isolation. When you can voice your shame to someone who responds with understanding rather than judgment, you begin to realize that feeling flawed doesn't mean you are flawed. The experience of being accepted despite your imperfections begins to rebuild your capacity for self-acceptance and authentic connection with others. Chapter 10. Creating your personal, letting go practice. Letting go isn't a one-time event. It's an ongoing practice that requires regular attention and cultivation. Just like physical fitness, emotional freedom requires consistent maintenance to prevent old patterns from reasserting themselves and new challenges from creating fresh attachments. Creating a personalized letting go practice ensures that you continue growing in emotional resilience and psychological freedom throughout your life. The foundation of any effective letting go practice is daily nervous system regulation. Your capacity to release old patterns and remain non-attached to new ones depends entirely on your ability to maintain a regulated nervous system state. When you're dysregulated, everything feels like a threat, and your brain defaults to old protective patterns regardless of what you consciously know or intend. Nervous system regulation isn't complicated, but it does require consistency. Simple practices like coherent breathing, cold exposure, gentle movement, or spending time in nature can maintain the neurological conditions that support emotional flexibility. The key is finding practices that you actually enjoy and can realistically maintain rather than forcing yourself into rigid routines that become another source of stress. Your regulation practice should include both proactive maintenance and responsive intervention strategies. Proactive maintenance involves daily practices that keep your nervous system balanced even when life is going well. Responsive intervention involves tools you can use when you notice yourself becoming attached, reactive, or emotionally triggered. Having both types of strategies ensures that you can maintain your emotional freedom regardless of external circumstances. The second component of a letting go practice is regular emotional inventory. This involves periodically examining what you might be holding on to without conscious awareness. Emotional attachments often develop gradually and can operate below the threshold of consciousness for long periods before you realize they're affecting your life. Weekly or monthly emotional inventories help you catch attachments while they're still relatively easy to release. You might ask yourself questions like, what am I trying to control that's outside my control? What outcomes am I attached to that are creating stress? What past experiences am I still carrying forward? What fears are limiting my current choices? This inventory process isn't about judging yourself for having attachments. It's about maintaining awareness so you can address them consciously rather than letting them accumulate unconsciously. The goal is to develop sensitivity to your own attachment patterns so you can course-correct quickly when you notice yourself getting stuck. The third element involves creating transition rituals for major life changes and losses. Transitions are natural opportunities for letting go, but without conscious ritual and intention, they often become sources of additional attachment and resistance. When you approach transitions with deliberate letting go practices, they become opportunities for growth and renewal rather than sources of trauma and regret. Transition rituals can be simple or elaborate, private or shared, depending on your preferences and circumstances. The important element is conscious acknowledgement of what you're releasing and what you're stepping into. You might write letters to past versions of yourself, create ceremonies that honor what you're leaving behind, or engage in physical actions that symbolize your willingness to move forward. These rituals serve both psychological and neurological functions. Psychologically, they provide closure and meaning-making that help integrate experiences into your life story. Neurologically, they create clear demarcations that help your brain update its models of reality and identity. Without conscious transitions, your nervous system often remains oriented toward old realities that no longer exist. The fourth component is building and maintaining relationships that support your emotional freedom rather than reinforcing old patterns. Your social environment has enormous influence on your capacity to let go and remain non-attached. Relationships that consistently trigger old wounds, reward emotional drama, or punish growth will undermine even the most dedicated personal practice. This doesn't mean you have to cut off everyone who challenges you or triggers your growth edges. It means consciously choosing to prioritize relationships that support your highest development while setting appropriate boundaries with those that don't. You want to be around people who model healthy emotional regulation, support your healing journey, and encourage your continued growth rather than those who benefit from keeping you stuck in old patterns. Building a supportive community often requires being selective about who you share your healing journey with and who you turn to for support during difficult times. Not everyone in your life needs to understand or support your commitment to emotional freedom, but you need at least a few people who do. These relationships become crucial resources during challenging periods when your individual practice feels insufficient. The fifth element involves developing mastery in one or more specific letting go techniques that resonate with your learning style and life circumstances. While it's helpful to understand many different approaches, true transformation comes from going deep with practices that you can implement consistently and effectively. Some people resonate more with body-based approaches like somatic experiencing or breathwork. Others prefer cognitive approaches like reframing and belief examination. Some find meaning in spiritual practices like meditation or prayer, while others prefer practical approaches like journaling or therapeutic processing. The specific technique matters less than your willingness to practice it regularly and your ability to access it when you need it most. Mastery develops through consistent practice over time, not through accumulating more techniques or information. It's better to become genuinely skilled with one approach than to remain superficial with many. As you develop mastery, you'll naturally integrate insights and techniques from other approaches, but your primary practice provides the foundation for all other learning. The final component of a sustainable letting go practice is regular integration and celebration of your progress. Emotional growth often happens gradually and can be difficult to recognize without conscious attention to how far you've come. Taking time to acknowledge your development reinforces the neural pathways associated with emotional freedom and motivates continued practice during challenging periods. Integration involves consciously recognizing how your letting go practice has changed your life, your relationships, and your capacity for joy and creativity. You might notice that conflicts that would have upset you for weeks now resolve in hours. Disappointments that would have derailed you for months now become minor bumps in your journey. Relationships that would have triggered old wounds now become opportunities for deeper connection and growth. Celebrating this progress isn't about spiritual pride or comparing yourself to others. It's about acknowledging the courage and commitment required for genuine emotional transformation and honoring the person you're becoming through your willingness to let go of who you've been. This celebration reinforces your identity as someone who grows through challenges rather than someone who gets stuck in them, which makes future letting go easier and more natural. Chapter 11. Advanced Letting Go. Releasing identity attachments. The deepest level of emotional attachment isn't to experiences, people, or outcomes. It's to your identity itself. Most people are so completely identified with their stories, their roles, and their self-concepts that they can't imagine who they would be without them. This identity attachment is the final frontier of letting go, and it's where the most profound transformation becomes possible. Your identity is largely composed of stories you tell yourself about who you are, based on what has happened to you. I am someone who was abandoned. I am someone who struggles with money. I am someone who can't trust people. I am someone who always fails. These identity stories feel absolutely true because they're based on real experiences, but they're actually just interpretations that have crystallized into rigid beliefs about your fundamental nature. The problem with identity attachment is that it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that limits your capacity for growth and change. When you believe at a core level that you are a certain type of person, you unconsciously make choices that confirm that identity. If you identify as someone who struggles financially, you'll unconsciously sabotage opportunities for financial success. If you identify as someone who can't maintain relationships, you'll unconsciously create conflicts that push people away. This isn't conscious self-sabotage. Your nervous system is simply trying to maintain coherence between your identity and your experience. When opportunities arise that contradict your core identity, your brain interprets them as threats to your sense of self and activates defensive responses to maintain the familiar story. You'd rather be right about who you are than be happy in ways that don't fit your self-concept. Understanding this mechanism is crucial because it explains why positive thinking and affirmations often fail. If you're trying to affirm that you're abundant while your core identity is built around struggle, your nervous system will reject the affirmation as false and potentially dangerous. You can't think your way into a new identity. You have to experientially prove to yourself that alternative identities are possible and safe. The process of releasing identity attachments begins with recognizing that your identity is not fixed. The person you were 5 years ago is different from who you are now, and the person you'll be 5 years from now will be different again. Identity is fluid and changeable, even though it often feels permanent. The stories you tell yourself about who you are based on your past don't have to determine who you become in the future. This recognition opens up what psychologists call identity flexibility, your capacity to experiment with different ways of being without feeling like you're betraying your authentic self. Instead of seeing yourself as having a fixed personality, you begin to understand that you have access to many different aspects and capabilities depending on the situation and your conscious choices. Identity flexibility allows you to try on new behaviors, beliefs, and ways of relating without the internal resistance that comes from identity threat. You can experiment with being generous if you've always seen yourself as selfish. You can practice being vulnerable if you've always identified as someone who needs to be strong. You can explore being creative if you've always believed you're not artistic. These experiments become evidence that contradicts your limiting identity stories. The key to successful identity evolution is making small, incremental changes rather than trying to completely reinvent yourself overnight. Your nervous system can adapt to gradual shifts without activating defensive responses. But dramatic changes often trigger identity crisis and resistance. You want to expand your sense of who you are rather than completely abandoning your existing identity. One powerful technique for releasing identity attachments is called identity archaeology. This involves examining the origins of your core identity beliefs and understanding the contexts in which they developed. Most limiting identity stories were formed during childhood or during particularly vulnerable periods when you needed to make sense of confusing or painful experiences. For example, if you identify as someone who's not smart, you might trace this belief back to struggling in school, being compared to siblings, or receiving criticism about your intelligence during formative years. Understanding that this identity formed as a way to protect yourself from further disappointment or criticism helps you realize that it may no longer be accurate or serving you. Identity archaeology isn't about blaming your past or excusing your current limitations. It's about understanding that your identity stories were adaptive responses to specific circumstances that may no longer exist. The part of you that learned to see yourself as not smart was trying to protect you from the pain of academic failure by lowering expectations. But this protection may now be preventing you from pursuing opportunities that require intellectual confidence. Another crucial aspect of releasing identity attachments is learning to distinguish between your essential self and your conditioned personality. Your essential self is the awareness that observes all your different thoughts, emotions, and behaviors without being limited by any of them. Your conditioned personality is the collection of habits, reactions, and self-concepts that developed in response to your life experiences. Most people are completely identified with their conditioned personality and believe it represents their true nature. But as you develop the capacity to observe your personality patterns without being controlled by them, you begin to access the freedom that comes from knowing that you are not your thoughts, you are not your emotions, and you are not your historical identity. You are the consciousness that can choose which aspects of yourself to express in any given moment. This shift from personality identification to essential self-awareness is perhaps the most liberating realization possible. It means that no matter what has happened to you, no matter what mistakes you've made, and no matter what limiting beliefs you've carried, your essential nature remains untouched and unlimited. You can always choose to express different aspects of yourself and create new experiences that contradict old identity stories. The process of identity evolution requires tremendous courage because it involves letting go of the familiar sense of self, even when that self has been limiting or painful. There's a period of uncertainty and confusion that happens when you're no longer who you were but haven't yet stabilized into who you're becoming. This transitional space can feel uncomfortable and disorienting, but it's where all genuine transformation happens. During this transitional period, it's important to have support from people who can see your potential beyond your current identity and who won't try to pull you back into old patterns. You need relationships that encourage your growth and evolution rather than reinforcing your old story about who you are. Sometimes this means creating distance from people who have too much investment in keeping you the same. The ultimate goal of releasing identity attachments isn't to become someone else, it's to become fully yourself. This means integrating all the different aspects of your personality while not being limited by any of them. You can access your strength when strength is needed and your vulnerability when vulnerability serves. You can express your analytical side and your creative side. You can be both independent and interdependent, depending on the situation. Chapter 12. Letting go in relationships. Freedom within connection. One of the greatest challenges in human experience is learning how to remain emotionally free while deeply connected to others. Most people oscillate between two extremes. Either they become overly attached and lose themselves in relationships, or they remain so detached that they never experience genuine intimacy. Learning to let go within relationships allows you to love fully without losing yourself and to remain autonomous while being genuinely connected. The foundation of healthy relational letting go is understanding the difference between love and attachment. Love is an open, flowing energy that wants the best for the other person regardless of what that means for you. Attachment is a possessive, clinging energy that wants the other person to be and do what makes you feel secure. Love liberates. Attachment imprisons. Love enhances both people. Attachment diminishes both. Most people confuse attachment with love because attachment often feels more intense and urgent. When you're attached to someone, you experience strong emotions about their choices, their moods, and their availability to you. You feel anxious when they're distant, jealous when they connect with others, and devastated when they consider leaving. This intensity feels like proof of how much you love them, but it's actually evidence of how much you need them to regulate your emotional state. Real love feels different. It's peaceful rather than anxious, expansive rather than constricting, supportive rather than demanding. When you love without attachment, you want the other person to be happy, even if their happiness doesn't include you. You support their growth, even when that growth changes the relationship. You celebrate their successes, even when those successes require less of their time and energy for you. This doesn't mean becoming indifferent or emotionally distant. Loving without attachment actually allows for deeper intimacy because you're not constantly protecting yourself from loss or trying to control outcomes. You can be fully present with the other person without the background anxiety that comes from attachment. You can share vulnerably without needing specific responses. You can offer support without expecting anything in return. Learning to let go in relationships requires developing what psychologists call differentiation, your ability to remain emotionally stable regardless of your partner's emotional state. When you're poorly differentiated, your partner's anxiety makes you anxious, their anger makes you defensive, and their sadness makes you responsible for fixing their problems. You're essentially emotionally fused, which feels intimate but actually prevents genuine connection. Differentiation allows you to remain compassionate and supportive when your partner is struggling without taking on their emotions as your own. You can comfort them without trying to change their experience. You can listen to their problems without feeling responsible for solving them. You can witness their pain without being consumed by it yourself. This creates space for them to have their own experience while still feeling connected to you. One of the most challenging aspects of relational letting go is releasing the need for your partner to meet all your emotional needs. Many people enter relationships with unconscious expectations that their partner will provide security, validation, entertainment, purpose, and emotional regulation. When these expectations aren't met, they feel betrayed or disappointed, not realizing that no one person can or should fulfill all these functions. Healthy relationships involve two emotionally mature people who meet their own core needs while choosing to share their lives together. This doesn't mean being emotionally self-sufficient to the point of not needing anyone. It means taking responsibility for your own emotional state, your own sense of purpose, your own self-worth, and your own happiness while being able to genuinely contribute to someone else's life from a place of fullness rather than neediness. This shift from neediness to choice transforms the entire dynamic of the relationship. Instead of staying together because you need each other, you stay together because you choose each other. Instead of being afraid of loss, you're grateful for connection. Instead of trying to prevent change, you support each other's continued growth and evolution. The relationship becomes a choice you make daily, rather than a dependency you maintain. Another crucial aspect of relational letting go is releasing the need to be right about how relationships should work. Many people have rigid ideas about what their partner should do, how they should communicate, and what the relationship should look like. These expectations often come from family of origin patterns, cultural programming, or fear-based beliefs about what creates security in relationships. But healthy relationships require flexibility and the ability to create something unique that works for the specific people involved, rather than trying to force a relationship to fit predetermined templates. This means being willing to negotiate, experiment, and adapt, rather than insisting on your way or demanding that your partner change to meet your expectations. Letting go of relationship scripts also means releasing the fantasy of finding someone who will complete you or make you whole. This romantic notion suggests that you're incomplete on your own and that the right person will fix whatever is missing. But this creates tremendous pressure on relationships and often leads to disappointment when you realize that even the most wonderful partner can't heal your childhood wounds, give you self-esteem, or provide your life with meaning. The healthiest relationships involve two whole people who enhance each other's lives rather than complete them. You bring your own sense of purpose, your own emotional stability, your own interests, and your own capacity for joy to the relationship, and so does your partner. Together, you create something that's greater than either of you individually, but you could both thrive independently if necessary. One of the most profound aspects of relational letting go is learning to love the person in front of you rather than your idea of who they could become. Many relationships suffer because one or both people are attached to the potential they see in their partner, rather than accepting who their partner actually is right now. This creates constant disappointment and pressure that prevents genuine intimacy from developing. Loving someone as they are doesn't mean accepting behavior that's harmful or refusing to support their growth. It means recognizing that you can't change anyone and that your love shouldn't be conditional on their becoming someone different. If you need them to be fundamentally different than they are for you to be happy, then you're not compatible. And trying to force compatibility through pressure or manipulation will only create suffering for both of you. This acceptance paradoxically creates more space for positive change than trying to force it. When people feel accepted as they are, they're more likely to risk vulnerability, try new behaviors, and continue growing. When they feel like they have to change to earn love, they often become defensive and resistant to any change at all. The ultimate goal of letting go in relationships is creating what relationship researcher John Gottman calls stable commitment with flexible adaptation. You're committed to the relationship and to your partner's well-being, but you're flexible about how that commitment gets expressed as both people continue to grow and change. You're loyal without being possessive, supportive without being controlling, and loving without being attached. Chapter 13. Letting go of control, embracing uncertainty, and flow. The need to control outcomes, other people, and life circumstances is one of the deepest sources of human suffering. Most people spend enormous amounts of energy trying to predict, manipulate, and guarantee specific results, only to discover that the most important aspects of life remain fundamentally uncertain. Learning to let go of control doesn't mean becoming passive or irresponsible. It means understanding the difference between what you can influence and what you cannot, and putting your energy where it can actually make a difference. Control is an illusion that develops as a response to feeling powerless. When you've experienced trauma, disappointment, or unexpected loss, your mind often concludes that the way to prevent future pain is to control as many variables as possible. You try to anticipate every potential problem, manage other people's reactions, and ensure specific outcomes through careful planning and constant vigilance. But this attempt to control the uncontrollable creates chronic stress and anxiety that often causes more suffering than the original situations you're trying to prevent. You become so focused on managing potential threats that you can't relax into present moments. You become so invested in specific outcomes that you can't appreciate what's actually happening. You become so busy trying to control your life that you forget to live it. The truth is that you have very little control over external circumstances, other people's choices, or even many aspects of your own experience. You can't control when opportunities arise, how others respond to you, whether your efforts succeed, or what challenges life presents. You can't control your partner's moods, your children's choices, your employer's decisions, or the economy's fluctuations. You can't even fully control your own thoughts, emotions, or physical health. What you can control is much smaller, but much more powerful. Your responses, your choices, your attention, and your internal state. You can control how you interpret events, what meaning you assign to experiences, and how you choose to respond to whatever circumstances arise. You can control what you focus on, what actions you take, and what energy you bring to situations. This is where your real power lies, and it's enough. This shift from trying to control outcomes to focusing on your responses is incredibly liberating. Instead of exhausting yourself trying to manage all the variables in your life, you can put your energy into developing your capacity to handle whatever happens. Instead of trying to prevent all possible problems, you can build resilience to deal with problems effectively when they arise. Instead of guaranteeing success, you can develop the skills and mindset that allow you to thrive regardless of external conditions. Learning to let go of control requires developing what psychologists call tolerance for uncertainty. Most people have very low tolerance for not knowing what will happen, which drives them to seek guarantees, make premature decisions, or avoid situations where outcomes are unclear. But uncertainty is the natural state of life, and trying to eliminate it prevents you from taking the risks necessary for growth and fulfillment. Developing tolerance for uncertainty involves gradually exposing yourself to unknown outcomes while maintaining emotional regulation. You might start with small uncertainties, like going to a restaurant without checking the menu first, or taking a different route home without mapping it out. As you build confidence in your ability to handle unexpected situations, you can gradually take larger risks and remain comfortable with bigger unknowns. The key insight is that uncertainty isn't dangerous. It's just uncomfortable. Your brain evolved to prioritize predictability because knowing where threats might come from increased survival chances. But in the modern world, this same programming often prevents you from pursuing opportunities that require stepping into the unknown. Learning to distinguish between actual danger and mere uncertainty allows you to take calculated risks that lead to growth and fulfillment. One of the most challenging aspects of letting go of control is releasing your attachment to specific timelines. Many people create suffering by demanding that good things happen quickly and that challenges resolve immediately. They become impatient when progress is slow, frustrated when setbacks occur, and discouraged when results don't match their expectations about how long things should take. But everything in nature has its own timing, and trying to force outcomes to happen faster than their natural pace often backfires. Relationships develop at their own speed. Careers unfold over decades. Healing happens in layers. Creative projects emerge when they're ready. Learning to align with natural timing rather than demanding artificial deadlines creates more ease and often leads to better outcomes. This doesn't mean becoming passive or losing your sense of urgency about what matters to you. It means balancing effort with patience, action with acceptance, and intention with surrender. You do everything you can to move toward your goals while remaining flexible about how and when those goals manifest. You plant seeds consistently while allowing them to grow in their own time. Another crucial aspect of releasing control is learning to trust the process, even when you can't see the outcome. Most people need to understand exactly how things will work out before they're willing to take action. But this need for certainty often prevents them from beginning journeys that could transform their lives. The most important growth often happens in the space between taking action and seeing results. This trust isn't naive optimism or magical thinking. It's based on understanding that taking aligned action consistently creates positive momentum, even when specific outcomes remain unclear. When you're moving in the right direction with good intentions and appropriate effort, beneficial opportunities and synchronicities often arise that you couldn't have planned or predicted. Trusting the process also means accepting that setbacks, detours, and apparent failures are often necessary parts of reaching your ultimate destination. What looks like the wrong path in the short term often turns out to be essential preparation for opportunities that you couldn't have been ready for without those experiences. The job rejection leads to a better opportunity. The relationship ending creates space for a more compatible partner. The business failure teaches lessons that make the next venture successful. Learning to flow with life rather than fighting against it requires developing what Taoists call wu-wei, or effortless action. This doesn't mean being lazy or passive, but rather learning to work with natural forces instead of against them. When you're in flow, your actions feel easy and natural, even when they're challenging. You're putting in effort, but it doesn't feel forced or strained. Flow states emerge when you're fully present, appropriately challenged, and aligned with your natural strengths and interests. You can't force flow to happen, but you can create conditions that make it more likely. This involves paying attention to your energy levels, working with your natural rhythms, and choosing activities that engage your genuine interests rather than what you think you should be doing. The ultimate paradox of letting go of control is that it often leads to more influence and effectiveness than trying to control everything. When you're not exhausting yourself fighting against reality, you have more energy available for creative problem solving. When you're not attached to specific outcomes, you can recognize and pursue unexpected opportunities. When you're not trying to control other people, they're more likely to be influenced by your authentic presence and genuine care. Chapter 14. The Spiritual Dimension. Letting Go as Sacred Practice. While letting go can be approached from purely psychological or practical perspectives, many people find that it naturally opens them to spiritual dimensions of experience that go beyond the personal self. This isn't about adopting any particular religious framework or belief system. It's about recognizing that the process of releasing attachment often reveals aspects of consciousness and connection that transcend individual identity and personal will. The spiritual dimension of letting go emerges when you begin to experience yourself as part of something larger than your individual story. As you release identification with your thoughts, emotions, and personal history, you may start to sense a deeper awareness that exists beyond your conditioned personality. This awareness doesn't belong to you. It's what you fundamentally are beneath all the layers of identity and attachment. Many wisdom traditions describe this shift as moving from ego consciousness to spiritual consciousness, from identification with the small self to recognition of the larger self. This isn't an abstract philosophical concept. It's a lived experience that can profoundly change your relationship to life, death, meaning, and purpose. When you taste this expanded awareness, letting go becomes less about personal psychology and more about aligning with the natural flow of existence. This spiritual awakening often begins with what mystics call ego death, the temporary dissolution of your sense of separate self. This can happen during meditation, in nature, through breathwork, or sometimes spontaneously during moments of crisis or surrender. For a brief period, the boundaries of your identity dissolve, and you experience consciousness without the usual filters of personal history, preferences, and fears. These experiences can be initially disorienting or even frightening because they challenge everything you thought you knew about who you are. But they're also profoundly liberating because they reveal that your essential nature is much vaster and more resilient than your personal identity. You begin to understand that what you've been protecting and defending is just a small subset of what you actually are. From this expanded perspective, personal problems and attachments are seen in a much larger context. The breakup that felt devastating becomes a small ripple in an ocean of experience. The career failure that seemed to define your worth becomes a temporary chapter in an infinite story. The fear that consumed your energy becomes a cloud passing through an endless sky. This doesn't minimize the reality of human pain, but it provides a framework for experiencing that pain without being overwhelmed by it. The spiritual dimension of letting go also involves recognizing what many traditions call divine will, or the Tao, or the flow of existence. This is the intelligence that orchestrates the seasons, heals wounds, grows plants from seeds, and coordinates the intricate dance of life on Earth. When you align with this intelligence rather than fighting against it, your individual will become an expression of this larger wisdom rather than a separate force trying to control outcomes. This alignment doesn't happen through belief or effort, but through surrender. You gradually learn to trust the intelligence that beats your heart, digests your food, and coordinates trillions of cellular processes without your conscious input. You begin to suspect that this same intelligence might be capable of organizing your external circumstances more wisely than your personal mind can imagine. Spiritual surrender is often misunderstood as passivity or resignation, but it's actually an active choice to align with wisdom that's larger than personal preferences and fears. You continue to take appropriate action and make responsible choices, but you hold these actions lightly, trusting that outcomes will unfold as they're meant to, regardless of your ability to control them. This trust is often tested through what spiritual traditions call dark nights of the soul, periods when everything you've relied on for security and identity seems to fall apart. These can involve loss of relationships, career disruption, health challenges, or simply a profound disillusionment with life as you've been living it. While these experiences are painful, they're also opportunities for deeper surrender and spiritual maturation. During these challenging periods, the spiritual dimension of letting go becomes most important. When your personal resources feel inadequate and your usual coping strategies stop working, you're invited to draw on sources of strength and wisdom that transcend your individual capacity. Many people discover during these times that they're supported by something much larger than their personal will and effort. Prayer, meditation, and contemplative practices become especially valuable during difficult transitions because they help you access this larger perspective and support. These practices aren't about asking for specific outcomes or trying to bargain with divine forces. They're about opening to guidance, strength, and peace that's always available but often obscured by mental noise and emotional reactivity. The spiritual path of letting go also involves what many traditions call service or devotion. As you release attachment to personal success and individual fulfillment, you naturally begin to care about the well-being of others and the health of the larger systems you're part of. Your energy shifts from "What can I get?" to "What can I give?" From "How can I be happy?" to "How can I be useful?" This shift isn't forced or artificial. It emerges naturally as you realize that your individual well-being is intimately connected to the well-being of others, and that true fulfillment comes from contributing to something larger than personal achievement. The boundaries between self and other become more permeable, and you begin to experience others' joy as your joy and others' suffering as your suffering. Compassion becomes effortless when you recognize that the consciousness looking out through your eyes is the same consciousness looking out through everyone else's eyes. The separation that seemed so real begins to reveal itself as a kind of cosmic play, and your attachments to maintaining that separation naturally begin to dissolve. Many people find that as they deepen their spiritual practice of letting go, synchronicities and meaningful coincidences become more frequent. Opportunities arise at perfect times. The right people appear when needed, and solutions emerge in ways that couldn't have been planned. This isn't magic or wishful thinking. It's what happens when you align with the natural flow of existence rather than constantly swimming against it. The ultimate spiritual realization in letting go is that there was never anything to hold on to in the first place. Everything that appears solid and permanent is actually constantly changing and flowing. Your thoughts, emotions, relationships, possessions, and even your body are temporary expressions of an ever-changing process. Trying to grasp onto any of these is like trying to hold onto water with your fist. This recognition brings profound peace because it ends the exhausting struggle to make the impermanent permanent and the changing unchanging. You can love fully while knowing that everything passes. You can engage completely while remaining unattached to outcomes. You can care deeply while accepting that you control very little. This is the freedom that spiritual traditions have pointed toward for thousands of years, and it's available to anyone willing to practice genuine surrender. Chapter 15. Living as a free human being. Your new life begins now. After everything you've learned about the nature of attachment, the science of emotional freedom, and the practical techniques for letting go, there comes a moment when you must choose whether to actually live differently or simply return to old patterns with new information. This choice determines whether your investment in understanding letting go becomes genuine transformation or just another interesting intellectual concept that doesn't change your daily experience. Living as a free human being means integrating everything you've learned into a new way of being that's sustainable in ordinary life. Not just during peak moments or controlled circumstances. It means maintaining emotional freedom while dealing with traffic, difficult people, financial stress, relationship conflicts, and all the mundane challenges that make up human existence. It means becoming someone who naturally responds to life from freedom rather than reactivity. This integration begins with recognizing that freedom is not a destination you reach. It's a quality of presence you cultivate moment by moment. Every situation becomes an opportunity to practice letting go. Every challenge becomes a chance to choose freedom over attachment. Every trigger becomes an invitation to respond consciously rather than react automatically. Your ordinary life becomes your spiritual practice, and your spiritual practice becomes your ordinary life. The first shift in living freely is moving from problem-solving mode to flow-following mode. Most people approach life as a series of problems to be solved, obstacles to be overcome, and outcomes to be achieved. This creates a constant state of mental effort and tension as you try to figure everything out and control results. But when you live from freedom, you learn to follow the natural flow of energy and opportunity rather than forcing predetermined agendas. This doesn't mean becoming passive or losing your sense of direction. It means becoming sensitive to subtle cues about timing, energy, and alignment that help you know when to push forward and when to wait, when to speak and when to listen, when to act and when to allow. You develop what some call spiritual intelligence, the ability to sense what wants to emerge through you rather than just pursuing what your ego thinks it wants. Living freely also means releasing the exhausting habit of carrying everyone else's emotions, opinions, and expectations. Free people create healthy boundaries not through walls and defenses, but through clear self-knowledge and the confidence to be authentic, regardless of others' reactions. You stop trying to manage other people's feelings about your choices, and you stop taking responsibility for outcomes that belong to other people. This emotional independence allows you to be genuinely compassionate without becoming codependent. You can care about others' well-being without sacrificing your own. You can offer support without taking over responsibility. You can love people deeply while letting them have their own experiences and learn their own lessons. This creates relationships based on choice rather than need, attraction rather than attachment, and mutual growth rather than mutual dependency. Another hallmark of living freely is developing what could be called outcome independence. You put your full energy and attention into whatever you're doing while remaining unattached to specific results. You do excellent work without being devastated if it's not recognized. You love completely without being destroyed if it's not reciprocated. You pursue goals enthusiastically without being derailed if they don't manifest exactly as planned. This outcome independence eliminates the chronic anxiety that comes from having too much invested in things you can't control. Instead of constantly worrying about whether your efforts will pay off, whether people will like you, or whether your plans will work out, you can put your energy into showing up fully for whatever is actually happening right now. This presence and authenticity often creates better results than trying to manipulate outcomes through worry and control. Free living also involves embracing what psychologists call post-traumatic growth, the capacity to become stronger, wiser, and more compassionate through difficult experiences rather than being diminished by them. Instead of seeing challenges as things that happen to you, you learn to see them as experiences that develop qualities and capacities you couldn't access otherwise. This doesn't mean seeking out suffering or pretending that painful experiences are good. It means developing the ability to extract wisdom, strength, and compassion from whatever life presents while maintaining your capacity for joy, creativity, and connection. You become anti-fragile, not just resilient. You actually become stronger through appropriate challenges rather than just surviving them. Perhaps the most noticeable quality of free living is a natural sense of lightness and humor about the human condition. When you're not carrying the weight of everyone's emotions, not attached to specific outcomes, and not trying to control the uncontrollable, there's a spontaneous joy that emerges even during difficult circumstances. You can laugh at your own patterns, appreciate the absurdity of human drama, and find beauty in unexpected places. This lightness isn't spiritual bypassing or denial. It's what naturally emerges when you're not making everything so serious and significant. You can engage fully with important matters while maintaining perspective about their place in the larger scheme of existence. You can care deeply without caring desperately. You can work hard without working frantically. You can love intensely without loving possessively. Living freely also means becoming comfortable with being misunderstood, criticized, or rejected by people who are invested in keeping you small, predictable, or limited. Not everyone will appreciate your growth or support your freedom. Some people benefit from your patterns of worry, people-pleasing, or self-limitation, and they may resist changes that require them to grow as well. The freedom to be authentic regardless of others' reactions is one of the greatest gifts you can give yourself and others. When you stop contorting yourself to gain approval or avoid conflict, you give other people permission to be authentic as well. Your willingness to be real creates space for deeper, more genuine connections while naturally filtering out relationships that were based on false premises. The final integration of free living is recognizing that your personal freedom contributes to the collective liberation of humanity. Every person who breaks free from unconscious patterns of attachment and reactivity makes it easier for others to do the same. Your healing becomes part of the healing of your family system, your community, and the larger web of relationships you're part of. You begin to understand that individual freedom and collective well-being aren't separate goals, but different aspects of the same process. As you release personal attachments that keep you small and fearful, you naturally become more generous, creative, and supportive of others' growth. Your freedom becomes a gift to everyone whose life you touch, creating ripple effects that extend far beyond what you can see or measure. This is your invitation to begin living from this freedom immediately, not after you've perfected all the techniques or resolved all your issues. Freedom isn't a prize you earn through adequate healing. It's your natural state that becomes accessible the moment you stop fighting reality and start flowing with what is. Every moment offers a fresh opportunity to choose freedom over attachment, presence over reactivity, and love over fear. The new life you've been seeking doesn't require changing your circumstances, finding different people, or waiting for better conditions. It requires changing your relationship to whatever circumstances, people, and conditions are already present. This is where your freedom lies. And this is where your new life begins. Right here, right now, with the next breath you take and the next choice you make.